Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week I'm going to talk a little bit about introducing movement or feeling of movement and motion into drawings and paintings. Drawings and paintings, of course, very static art form. Yes, we can combine individual drawings into animation, but each of those individual drawings by themselves is quite static. But over the centuries, different artists have tried different tricks, techniques, approaches to indicate or to give a feeling of motion and movement into their artwork. So that's what I'm going to try and show you in this video. The first example you can see on screen is one of these Japanese woodblock prints by the artist Hokusai. And he's obviously done a windy day. So in the foreground, we can see these figures. Some papers are blowing away, a hat's blown away. When we look at art, we're not looking at it as empty boxes. We have understanding, or at least some understanding of the world. We have experience of the world. We can look at these sort of props, these clues or cues that Hokusai is giving us, and interpret them. So when we see a hat floating in midair, we know it's not actually floating in midair. It was on someone's head and it's blown off and it's now flying through the air. So we can interpret, or most of us can interpret art and understand what's happening. So I say this is one approach, one way of indicating motion and movement is giving people clues and cues, visual clues that they can understand and interpret. This, of course, is not the only way. Other artists have tried other approaches as well. This painting, this is by an Italian artist, and it's often included in Futurism movement. Futurism, somewhat short-lived art movement, mainly Italian. They were obsessed with, well, the future and speed and motion and so on. And so some of their paintings and drawings try to include this feeling of motion and movement. It's not one of my favorite art movements. They were obsessed with war and destruction and violence and nationalism. They became tied up with Mussolini's fascist movement and stuff. So from a political point of view, I really don't like this art movement, but it's not because of the art itself. So some of the paintings, this is one of the cuter futurist paintings, I guess. And we can see the dog, we understand again. We can look at the cues, the clues, and we can understand the dog is wagging its tail. We know that the dog, he didn't paint. This is an Italian artist. You can see a photograph of him. We know that he didn't paint a dog with 10 tails. He's trying to indicate that the dog's tail is wagging, it's moving. The same with the legs, they're going a million miles an hour. We understand what's happening here. So again, it's another way of indicating motion and movement. And this sort of style is not unique to this painting. It's a style that was used in comic books and still is probably used in comic books a lot. I don't know if that developed separately, if one was inspired by the other, I don't know. But comic books use a similar sort of approach. So superhero comics, lots of action lines, use of color sometimes. And you had some artists, the pop artist, 1960s American pop artist Roy Lichtenstein. He did large-scale paintings, this type of thing as well. And of course, sometimes you include words, and there's like pow and dynamic action words and such like. And it's not just the colors, the words, the action lines, it's also the poses. The poses are very sort of action-like as well. They're not static poses. It suggests, again, this idea of movement and action within the image. And again, this idea of including figures with action poses or poses that suggest movement is also not unique to comic books. Other artists have used this as well. The French artist Degas, he's usually associated with Impressionism, although in my opinion he was not an Impressionist artist. That's not a criticism, it's just, in my opinion, a statement of fact, but other people disagree. Anyway, we'll not get into that. In terms of Degas, he had two big passions in life, maybe three. One was art, obviously. The second was horse racing, and then the third was the ballet. So in terms of horse racing, he did lots of paintings and drawings of horses and jockeys. And, again, from life and experience, we know that racehorses can be a bit jittery. They don't stand still for long. They're sort of moving. And we can see that in the poses of the horses and the way the jockeys are hanging onto the reins. These horses, they're trying to control the horses. The horses want to move. And we understand this. So again, this is a way of introducing this idea of movement and motion within the piece of art. I said Degas was also very interested in the ballet. He did lots of paintings and drawings of ballerinas. And again, he often did these drawings and paintings with the ballerinas in sort of active poses, not static. They're not just standing still. They're on one foot or something. They're maybe doing some sort of warm-up exercise or a practice exercise or something. But again, we can look at it and we can see that these are temporary poses. Slightly unbalanced, there's movement, there's a feeling of imminent movement or motion. Again, it's one way of introducing this feeling into artwork. This is obviously mainly for animals and figure drawing. For me, I'm mostly interested in landscape painting and drawing. So in the case of landscapes, what we saw at the beginning with hook size print, one way of introducing an idea of motion and movement. Another is to introduce birds. So like hook size piece of art, the hat, we know the hat was sitting on someone's head and then blew off and it's flying through the sky. It's blowing through the sky. We know that it's not just floating in the sky. And it's the same with birds in landscapes. So we know that birds don't hang from bits of string in the sky. They're not just floating there like a balloon or something. They're moving, they're flying. So again, bringing this knowledge of the real world and looking at the painting, we can, somewhere in our brains, we understand there's movement, motion here. The birds are flying. They're moving through the sky. So this is something that Vince van Gogh used here in his Wheatfield painting with the crows, the black crows. For me, this is something that I've picked up on and used a couple of times in my own landscape drawings. My style of drawing, of course, very different from Vincent's, but it's the same idea. It's the idea of using these birds in the sky to suggest, indicate the idea of movement or motion. Definitely something that I recommend. Study other artists from the past, look at what they were doing, learn from it, incorporate it into your own art. You can feel as though you're making progress in your own art by learning from these artists from the past, in my experience anyway. Another example, so I mostly do landscapes, occasionally do figure drawings, not exactly urban landscapes. I'm not really into architecture and buses and trucks and cars and things. I'm more just interested in people, the way people interact and move through urban landscapes. And sometimes do these charcoal sketches of people. And this is something that, I've picked up from Degas' art. It's the idea of the poses, they're walking, they're moving. It's not just static, standing still poses, usually. Also, the material I'm using, charcoal. Charcoal can give you these sort of fuzzy, indistinct, ghost-like images, outlines. And that can also, maybe, at least in my case, it can suggest movement as well. A more distinct, crisp pencil line, for example, or ink line, doesn't have that same feeling of fuzziness and movement to me. So again, this is something I've learned from looking at other artists from the past, Degas, for example. It's an interesting thing, trying to indicate or suggest movement within static artwork and learning from artists from the past. Something I definitely recommend. Anyway, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching and listening. Hopefully the sound quality is not too bad in this video. And if you made it this far, thank you, and hopefully see you again in next week's video.